This is my true story. I spent my entire life working, saving, and making sure my daughter never had to struggle the way I did. I gave her everything: a roof, an education, a future. I believed when I got old, she'd return the same care with love and respect. But one morning over breakfast, she looked at me and said the words I never thought I'd hear from my own child. "Mom, you're a financial burden." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just smiled and nodded. Then I changed one thing she never expected. "Before that, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people." She said it casually, as if she were commenting on the weather. There was no anger in her tone, no hesitation, just a careless truth falling from her mouth. "Mom, you're a financial burden." She was looking at her phone when she said it, not even looking at me. My spoon stopped halfway to my mouth, the coffee still steaming, the sound of the refrigerator filling the silence she left behind. It wasn't a shout. It didn't need to be. Some words don't echo. They settle deep and stay there. I stared at her for a second, waiting for her to realize what she had just said. She didn't. She just kept scrolling. I forced a small smile, nodded, and said, "Thank you for your honesty." She looked up briefly, confused, but didn't apologize. She thought my calm meant acceptance. It didn't. It meant I was finished explaining my worth. That sentence stayed with me all day. I didn't cry. I didn't tell anyone. I just went quiet. I thought about how strange it was to be called a burden by the person who had once cried for my arms as a baby. I thought about how many years I had worked, saved, and sacrificed so that she could have an easy life. Every bill I paid, every long night I worked late, every birthday I skipped rest to make special, all of it had been for her. And now I was a burden. That's how quickly gratitude can expire, not with shouting or cruelty, but with entitlement. She didn't mean it as an insult, not exactly. She said it with the same tone people use when they talk about costs and budgets, as if I were another expense she needed to manage. Maybe she even thought she was being honest, practical, responsible. But honesty without kindness is cruelty dressed as maturity. That's what she didn't understand. She had grown so used to my help that she forgot it came from love, not obligation. I was the one who built her safety net. Now she was complaining that I existed in it. The rest of the day moved normally. She left for work, called me in the afternoon about dinner plans, and laughed on the phone like nothing had happened. I answered her questions, but my mind was elsewhere. I wasn't thinking about what she said anymore. I was thinking about what I could do about it. I've always been quiet, but quiet doesn't mean unaware. People forget that the older generation understands systems better than they think. The bills, the accounts, the paperwork. She thought I had no idea how money moved. She thought I lived in the past. She forgot who set up her future. That night, I went to my room and opened my old folder of bank documents. I hadn't looked at them in years. The papers smelled faintly of ink and time. I traced my name with my finger where it appeared next to hers on the joint account. My name was the one that opened it, the one that funded it, the one that kept it alive. She used the card that came from my balance, my earnings, my life's work. I had thought it was love. I realized it had become convenience. And convenience, when unappreciated, turns into disrespect. I sat there for a while, staring at the papers, remembering the day I added her name to that account. I had been so proud. I thought it meant trust, a bond that would never break. I thought it was a sign that no matter what happened, we'd always be connected. But bonds mean nothing when one side forgets who built them. I closed the folder and placed it on the table beside my bed. I didn't make a decision right away. I wanted to be sure. I wanted to be calm. But something in me shifted permanently that night. By morning, I was back to my routine. Breakfast, chores, quiet. She greeted me with her usual half-smile, kissed my cheek, and went off to work again, unaware that I had already started detaching piece by piece. She thought my silence meant surrender. She didn't realize silence in the right hands is a plan. I didn't raise my voice or defend myself. I just listened to her leave, closed the door behind her, and poured myself another cup of coffee. The same spoon I'd dropped the day before didn't shake this time. I stirred it slowly, steady, already thinking of what I'd do next. Everything my daughter had in her life could be traced back to me. Every comfort, every opportunity, every small luxury. It all started with my hard work. I built the foundation she stood on, but somewhere along the way, she forgot who laid the bricks. When she was little, I worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. I skipped meals so she could have new clothes for school. I stayed up nights, worried about bills, hiding the stress so she could sleep peacefully. I told myself it was worth it, that all the exhaustion would one day pay off when she grew up grateful and kind. But gratitude fades fast when comfort becomes routine. The house she lived in, I paid the down payment. The car she drove, bought in my name because her credit wasn't strong enough back then. Even her business, the one she bragged about starting on her own, was funded by my retirement savings. I signed the papers. I covered the insurance. I made sure she never had to start from zero like I did. I used to feel proud when she told people she was successful. I thought I'd done my job right. Now I realized I had only taught her how to take, never how to value. She used to call me her rock. Now I was a financial burden. The same woman who gave her everything had become a problem to be solved. I remembered the countless times she came to me asking for help. "Mom, can I borrow a little?" "I'll pay you back," I always said yes, knowing she wouldn't. Not because I was naive, but because I couldn't stand to see her struggle. I told myself it was love. Now I see it was habit, hers to ask, mine to give. Habits can feel like love until they start hurting. When she bought her first home, I was the one who helped with the closing costs. I told her it was a gift, but deep down, I believed she'd eventually understand how much it meant. Years passed. The thank yous stopped coming. My support became expected. I stopped being appreciated and became automatic, like a monthly bill that no one notices until it's late. I didn't blame her for growing up in comfort. I blamed myself for never teaching her that comfort costs something. Sometimes when she'd talk to her friends on the phone, I'd hear her saying things like, "My mom helps out sometimes, but I handle most of it." I would smile quietly in the next room. That wasn't true, but I let her say it. Maybe I thought it was her way of trying to be independent. Maybe I thought she'd come around someday and realize the truth. But the more I gave, the more invisible I became. Kindness, when taken for granted, turns into background noise. She never noticed how much I was still doing, even in small ways. The groceries she never had to worry about. The electric bill I quietly paid when her account was short. The small transfers I sent every time she said just until payday. I didn't mind then. I thought helping was what mothers do. But that morning, when she said I was a burden, I realized she didn't see any of it anymore. In her mind, my giving had turned into taking. The woman who carried her was now costing her. That single sentence, "You're a financial burden," erased decades of sacrifice in one breath. But I didn't argue. I didn't remind her of the past. I didn't list all I'd done. People like her don't learn through reminders. They learn through consequences. I knew one thing she couldn't ignore: money. The same thing she used to measure my worth would soon become the lesson that measured hers. I didn't need revenge. I just needed balance. So I looked again at those papers and thought, if she sees me as a burden, maybe I should stop carrying hers. The next morning, nothing seemed different on the surface. I made coffee, tidied the kitchen, and sat by the window like I always did. But something inside me had changed completely. I no longer felt like the woman waiting to be appreciated. I was the woman preparing to take back what was hers. My daughter went about her day as usual, humming while getting ready for work, leaving her empty cup in the sink for me to wash. She kissed my cheek before leaving, the same way she always did, like it was a habit, not affection. When the door closed behind her, I looked at the quiet house and decided that would be the last day I'd live as someone else's afterthought. I started small. I pulled out every financial document I had: account statements, bills, old receipts, joint agreements. I wrote down every detail: account numbers, balances, dates, and names. Years of paperwork that she had ignored now sat neatly on the table, organized by hand. She assumed my age made me slow and forgetful. She never realized I had been keeping mental records for decades. My memory wasn't fading. I just had stopped wasting it on people who didn't deserve space in it. Every number told a story, and every story pointed to one truth. I had built her comfort brick by brick, and she had called it hers. By the second day, I made a list of things she no longer needed to access. The credit card linked to my account, the bills in my name, the joint savings we once shared. For years, she had promised to handle finances when I got older. I smiled at the thought. I was still capable, maybe not as fast, but far wiser than she'd ever be. She thought she was managing me. I was already managing her expectations. On the third day, I took the bus to the bank. I could have asked for a ride, but I didn't want her to know. The branch manager greeted me by name. He'd known me for years. I told him I needed to review my accounts. He smiled and asked if something was wrong. "No," I said. "I just need to make sure everything is in the right hands." He nodded and printed out my records. I looked at the numbers carefully, the balances I had worked a lifetime for. Everything still flowed through my name. The joint account, the one she used freely, sat quietly on the list. I folded the paper neatly and put it back into my purse. I knew what needed to be done. That evening, she came home complaining about traffic and bills. She talked about expenses, how tight things were, and how she might need to borrow a little again. I nodded like always, keeping my face calm. Inside, I was thinking of how differently she'd speak when the money stopped being hers to touch. I wasn't angry. Anger is noisy and burns too fast. I was patient. Patience makes change quieter, more precise. Over the next few days, I kept my routine steady so she wouldn't notice anything. I cooked her favorite meals, asked her about work, even reminded her of her appointments. I gave her nothing to suspect. But every night after she went to bed, I reviewed another set of papers. I was preparing for a shift she wouldn't see coming. On Friday, I made one final note in my book, the date I would visit the bank again. This time, not to check, but to change. It was almost amusing how easy it was. One sentence from her had undone a lifetime of tolerance, and yet it had given me something powerful: clarity. People think revenge comes with shouting, confrontation, or drama. It doesn't. Sometimes it comes with calm hands, quiet mornings, and steady steps. She thought my silence meant she had won. She was wrong. My silence meant I was finished being her safety net. I had spent years building her life. Now I was about to remind her whose foundation she had been standing on. The following Monday, I woke up early, dressed neatly, and took the same brown leather folder that held all my documents. I didn't tell my daughter I was going anywhere. She was still asleep when I closed the front door. I walked to the bus stop with a calm I hadn't felt in years. My decision was made. It wasn't revenge. It was correction. The morning was quiet, and so was I. When I reached the bank, the manager greeted me by name. I'd been a customer there for more than 20 years. "Good morning, Mrs. Harris," he said with a smile. "What can we help you with today?" I placed the folder on the counter and said, "I'd like to make a change to one of my accounts." He led me to his desk, and I sat down, pulling out the joint account papers, the one with my daughter's name printed next to mine. He glanced at them and asked politely, "Do you want to add another person?" I looked him straight in the eye and said, "No. I want to remove one." He nodded slowly, understanding more than I said out loud. He asked for my ID, confirmed my signatures, and began typing. The sound of his keyboard was steady, almost rhythmic. I signed 3 papers, initialed 2 boxes, and just like that, 20 years of shared access disappeared in seconds. The account now belonged to one person again: me. When he finished, he looked up and asked if I wanted to notify the other party. I shook my head. "No," I said. "Let the bank statement do that for me." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile people give when they've seen this story before. He printed my new documents, handed me my updated card, and said, "Everything's been finalized. Only your name remains." I placed the papers neatly back into my folder and thanked him. I didn't feel angry or victorious. I just felt light. Before leaving, I stopped by the teller's counter and withdrew a small amount of cash. Not much, just enough for small things I liked. I didn't want to use the card anymore. I wanted to keep things simple, in my control. The teller smiled politely, unaware she was witnessing the quietest moment of independence I'd ever taken. I walked out into the sunlight, holding my small envelope of cash and my new documents. It felt like I was reclaiming more than money. I was reclaiming dignity. On the ride home, I thought about how easy it had been. People think power comes with force or noise, but it doesn't. It comes with control. I had given her access out of trust. I had removed it out of necessity. Trust can rebuild, respect cannot. By the time I reached home, my decision felt like it had always been meant to happen. I made tea, sat by the window, and looked at the small garden she never cared for. I realized that everything she took for granted, the house, the bills, the food, had one thing in common: my name behind it. That evening, when she came home, I greeted her the same way as always. She talked about work, about shopping, about needing to fix some bills. I nodded, not saying a word. She didn't notice the small envelope on my desk, or the folder beside it, or the faint smile on my face. It wasn't a secret. It was just something she would eventually discover the hard way. I wasn't in a rush. Some lessons need time to mature before they strike. After dinner, she sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, talking about new clothes and weekend plans. I listened quietly, sipping my tea. She still thought life moved the same way, that every card swipe would go through, that every comfort was automatic. I didn't remind her that life was about to teach her balance. Some people learn through love. Others learn through the sound of a declined transaction. Either way, she was about to learn what happens when the hand that gives finally closes. The first few days after I changed the account were strangely peaceful. Nothing in the house felt different, but I knew the balance of power had already shifted. She had no idea yet. Her routine stayed the same: morning coffee, online shopping, takeout deliveries, small luxuries she never thought twice about. I watched it all quietly, the way someone watches rain on the window, knowing it would stop soon. She bragged about ordering new clothes, expensive skincare, and something for the living room she just had to have. I smiled and listened, knowing the payments hadn't cleared yet. There's a calm that comes right before truth introduces itself. That's where I lived that week. She still used the same card linked to my account, the one she never truly owned but had gotten too comfortable using. Every night she sat at the table, scrolling through her phone, talking about what she wanted to buy next. I nodded, as if I cared, as if I hadn't already erased her access. She thought she was in control. She thought everything she touched would work the same way it always had. It was almost poetic, except there was nothing poetic about this moment. It was math, simple subtraction. I made sure the bills were all moved under my private account first. The lights, the phone, the insurance, everything stayed in good standing. I wasn't being reckless. I wasn't cutting myself off. I was cutting her off. There's a difference. I didn't want chaos. I wanted clarity. I wanted her to see how quickly her world would shrink once I stopped being her foundation. That week, I spent time walking through the house, noticing little things. The shoes by the door she bought with my card, the tablet on the couch she borrowed but never returned, the perfume bottles lined up on her dresser, each one a quiet receipt of my generosity. It wasn't anger I felt. It was awareness. I had built this life, funded this comfort, and none of it had ever been recognized. She had built her pride on top of my sacrifices, and now that pride was standing on borrowed ground. On Thursday evening, she was sitting on the sofa, excitedly talking about a weekend sale. "I'm going to get a new phone," she said. "Mine's slow." I asked her, "Do you really need one?" She looked at me, laughing. "Mom, please, you wouldn't understand. These things matter." I nodded again. "You're right," I said softly. "I wouldn't." She didn't notice the way I said it. She didn't notice that I wasn't asking anymore. I was waiting. The quiet before the storm has its own kind of music. Every morning I'd hear her typing. Every night she'd giggle at her phone. And somewhere in between, I'd see the small pile of unopened mail building on her desk, bank envelopes, credit card statements, and online receipts. I didn't touch them. I just walked past, sipping my tea, knowing the world was preparing its own lesson for her. People always think revenge is loud, full of shouting and confrontation, but real justice is patient. It doesn't chase the moment, it waits for it. I didn't plan to humiliate her or teach her a cruel lesson. I just wanted her to understand what her words meant. When you call someone a burden, you declare yourself independent. and independence, when tested, demands proof. By Saturday, I felt lighter than I had in years. My phone stayed quiet, my thoughts calmer. I hadn't told a single person what I'd done, and I didn't need to. The truth doesn't need an audience, it just needs time. I watered the plants, cleaned the kitchen, and went on with my day. Everything looked normal. Everything sounded normal. But under that calm surface, something important was about to shift. Not for me, but for her. It's funny how peace and consequence can live in the same house without ever touching. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't warn her. I just waited, knowing that sometimes the only thing more powerful than saying enough is silently proving you mean it. Her comfort had an expiration date. She just hadn't read the fine print yet. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. The sky was quiet, and I was sitting by the window reading when the phone rang. Her name flashed across the screen, and I already knew why she was calling. I answered calmly. Her voice came through fast, tight, and frustrated. "Mom, my card isn't working. I think the bank made a mistake." I kept my tone soft. "That's strange," I said. "Try again." She sighed, said she already had, and that it kept declining. I told her maybe it was just a system issue, to give it a few minutes and try one more time. She muttered something under her breath, said she was standing in line at the store, and hung up. I sat there quietly, sipping my tea, waiting for the next call. It didn't take long. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, she wasn't calm. "Mom, it's still not working. It says transaction declined. I can't pay for anything. I'm embarrassed." Her voice cracked on that last word. Embarrassed, a feeling she hadn't known in a long time. I listened to her breathe heavily through the phone, panic slowly taking over her usual confidence. I asked again, "Did you check the balance?" She snapped, "Why would I? It's the joint account. It always has money." I smiled to myself. "You might want to check it now," I said quietly. The line went silent for a few seconds. Then I heard her tapping on her phone, opening her banking app. A few seconds later came her voice, smaller, slower, uncertain. "Mom, what happened? It says my name isn't on the account. Did you change something?" Her voice didn't sound angry anymore. It sounded scared. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence hang between us like a reflection. Then I said, "Yes. I changed what didn't appreciate me." She didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. I could hear her swallow, hear the weight of realization sinking in. Finally, she said, "Mom, you can't do that." We agreed. I cut her off gently. "We didn't agree," I decided. "You forgot whose money that was. You forgot whose name built everything you spend." There was another pause, this one longer, heavier. When she finally spoke again, her voice was trembling. "I didn't mean it when I said that. I was just stressed. Please, change it back." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lecture her. I just said, "No, dear, you meant it. You said I was a financial burden. I only made sure I stopped being one." Her breathing changed again, shallow, broken. She started crying softly, asking why I would do this to her. "To you?" I repeated. "You said I was costing you. So I gave you what you wanted. Freedom." The silence after that was colder than anything I had ever heard. She hung up without another word. I didn't call back. I didn't explain. Some truths don't need repeating. That night, I sat by the window again, looking out at the dark street, and felt an odd calm settle in. It wasn't joy or pride. It was peace, the kind that comes when you finally draw a line and mean it. The next day, I saw her car pull into the driveway. She didn't come inside. She sat there for a few minutes, probably trying to decide whether to knock or drive away. In the end, she left. Later that evening, I saw a text. "I can't believe you did this." I read it once, then deleted it. I didn't need to reply. She was finally learning the difference between support and dependence. I wasn't punishing her. I was simply showing her what her own words looked like when mirrored back. Money had been the language she used to measure everything. respect, value, success. She had used it to define me. Now it was teaching her. And the lesson didn't come in anger or cruelty. It came in silence, in a line at a store, in the cold sound of a card machine saying declined. Sometimes that's all it takes to wake a person up. One quiet no after a lifetime of yes. By the next morning, the calls stopped. She didn't message, didn't show up, didn't try to argue. I thought maybe she needed time to calm down, to process what had happened. But in truth, she wasn't silent because she understood. She was silent because she didn't know what to say now that her safety net was gone. For the first time in her adult life, she had to stand without my support beneath her. I spent the morning as usual, cleaning the kitchen, watering the plants, folding laundry. Everything felt strangely peaceful. I'd done what needed to be done. The quiet was no longer uncomfortable. It was earned. Around noon, she finally arrived. I heard her car door slam hard, the hurried footsteps up the path, the sound of the key in the lock. She still had a copy, but I didn't move to take it away. Let her come. Let her look me in the eye. She walked into the living room holding her phone like it was proof of something. Her face was red, eyes tired, expression caught between anger and disbelief. "Did you really do it?" she asked. I didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Yes," I said, still folding towels. "I did." She stared at me for a long moment. "Why would you do something like that?" "You embarrassed me." I looked up, calm, steady. "No," I said. "I protected myself." She started pacing, shaking her head, muttering under her breath. "Do you have any idea what this looks like?" I was at the store. People were staring. They thought I didn't have money. I looked her right in the eye. "Now you know how it feels to depend on someone and be treated like a burden." She froze, realizing what I meant. Her face softened for a moment, then hardened again. "You didn't have to do this." "You could have talked to me." I let out a small laugh. "I did, for years. You just never listened. You only heard me when the money stopped moving." She sat down on the edge of the couch, speechless. For the first time, she looked small. Not because she was weak, but because she was lost. All the pride that had filled her voice before was gone. "Mom," she said quietly, "I didn't mean it. I was just upset. You know how things have been lately. I didn't think you'd take it so seriously." I stopped folding and sat across from her. "You called me a financial burden," I said. "You didn't say it in anger. You said it because you meant it, and I believed you. So I made sure you never had to carry that burden again." Tears filled her eyes, but they weren't from guilt yet. They were from shock. She finally understood that I wasn't bluffing. The account was changed, the money moved, the access gone. Her world had shifted without warning. "What am I supposed to do now?" she asked. I shrugged lightly. "Live, work, earn your way, the same way I did, the same way I taught you to." She looked at me like I'd just betrayed her. But the truth was, I had only ended a betrayal she started. She stood up suddenly, anger flickering back. "You're cruel," she said. "You've never done something like this before." I stayed calm. "No, I've never had to," I said softly, "because I thought you were better than this." She didn't answer. She turned, grabbed her bag, and walked out. The door closed harder than it needed to, but I didn't flinch. I sat there for a long time after, listening to the silence fill the room again. It wasn't an empty silence. It was peaceful, the sound of a line being drawn. Later that night, I got another message from her. Just 4 words. I didn't mean it. I read it twice, then put my phone down without replying. Regret isn't real until it comes with change. She would have to live with what she said long enough to understand it. That was the only way she'd learn. The world hadn't ended for her. It had just stopped being funded by someone else's kindness. And maybe that's what she needed. Not punishment, not revenge, just reality. The days after that argument were quiet, almost unnaturally so. She didn't call, didn't visit, didn't even send a message. The silence between us stretched long enough to make me wonder if she finally understood. I went about my days normally. I cooked for myself, walked to the market, talked to neighbors, and even went to the bank again just to make sure everything was secure. The account sat firmly under my name. My savings were safe, untouchable, finally mine again. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't being drained, not financially, not emotionally. It was strange at first, that peace. I'd spent so long living for her needs that when they disappeared, I realized how much space she'd occupied in my life. After about a week, she finally called. Her voice was flat, quiet. "Mom, I'm sorry," she said. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to see what kind of sorry it was, the kind that fixes things or the kind that just fills silence. She continued, "I was wrong. I shouldn't have said what I said, but I really need help. I can't pay my rent this month. The bills are piling up. I'll pay you back as soon as I can." I took a deep breath and said calmly, "No, you won't. You've never paid me back before, and that's all right, but it ends now." She tried to interrupt, but I kept going. "This isn't about money anymore. It's about respect. You used to call me when you needed something. Now you'll have to learn how to handle life without expecting someone else to fix it." She went quiet. For a few seconds, I thought she hung up. Then I heard her crying softly. I didn't comfort her. I just listened. It wasn't out of cruelty. It was because she needed to sit in that moment and feel what it was like to face the consequences of her own choices. After a while, she whispered, "I didn't think you'd really cut me off." I said, "You thought I'd keep letting you disrespect me because I'm your mother. But motherhood doesn't mean servitude. It means sacrifice. And I've already made mine." A few weeks later, I heard from a friend that she'd taken on extra shifts at work. She sold her car to cover her bills. She moved into a smaller apartment closer to her job. I didn't reach out, but I didn't feel proud either. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was relief. She was finally living the way adults are meant to, responsibly. The daughter who once called me a burden was now budgeting every dollar, counting every expense, learning lessons I couldn't have taught her with words. It wasn't revenge. It was growth, painful and necessary. Meanwhile, I started focusing on myself for the first time in decades. I fixed up the garden, took old clothes to donation, and reopened the craft shop I'd once run from home. It wasn't for the money, it was for joy. For years, I'd stopped doing things that made me happy because every extra bit went toward her comfort. Now, when I earned, I kept it. I spent it how I pleased. The first thing I bought was a small gold bracelet. Nothing extravagant, just a reminder that I still mattered. Months passed before she came to visit again. She looked thinner, quieter, humbled. She brought a small plant as a gift, a gesture that, for once, wasn't tied to asking for something. We sat in the kitchen, drinking tea. The silence between us was different now. She finally spoke. "Mom, I understand now. I didn't see what you did for me until it was gone." Her voice cracked a little. "I was wrong." I didn't say much. I just nodded. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't need words. It just needs time. After she left, I stood by the window and watched her drive away. I didn't feel anger or sadness anymore. I felt closure. The same woman who once measured me by my money had learned that respect is the only currency that never runs out. She learned it the hard way, but she learned. And as for me, I learned that love can exist without being taken advantage of. That letting someone fall isn't cruelty when it's the only way they'll learn to stand. It was early evening when she finally came back for a real visit. Not to ask for money, not to argue, not to explain, just to see me. I was sitting on the porch, watching the sun go down, when her car pulled into the driveway. She got out slowly, carrying a small brown paper bag. Her steps were hesitant, like she wasn't sure she should even be there. When she reached the steps, she said quietly, "Hi, Mom." I nodded and said, "Hi." No anger, no warmth either, just level ground. She handed me the bag and said, "I brought you something." It's not much inside were 2 pastries from a local bakery I used to love. I hadn't mentioned that place in years. For the first time in a long time, she'd remembered something about me that didn't involve what I could give her. She sat down beside me, and for a while we didn't talk. The silence wasn't uncomfortable this time. It was thoughtful. After a few minutes, she said, I've been thinking about everything. Her voice was soft, slower than usual. I know you probably don't want to hear it, but I'm sorry. Not just for what I said, but for how I acted for years. I didn't interrupt. She continued, I didn't realize how much you carried until I had to do it myself. I thought you'd always be there to clean things up. I thought money came easy because it always seemed to be there. I never thought about who made it possible. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a kind of exhaustion I'd never seen before. Not just from work or stress, from humility. It's hard to face yourself when you've lived so long thinking the world owes you. She wiped her eyes and said, I shouldn't have called you a burden. You were never that. You were everything. I just didn't see it until I lost it. I let her speak. Every word she said was one I had waited to hear, but I didn't want to rush it. People who truly learn don't need prompting. When she finished, I said quietly, You didn't just hurt me with what you said. You made me realize how invisible I had become in my own home. You took my giving for granted and turned it into an expectation. That's what broke me. She nodded slowly, eyes down. I know, she said, and I don't blame you for what you did. I probably needed it. That was the first honest sentence she'd spoken to me in years. We sat there until the sky turned dark. She told me about her new job, her smaller apartment, how she'd started cooking instead of eating out, how she'd learned to save. She said, It's strange, Mom. I never realized how much things cost until they came from my own wallet. I smiled slightly. That's how value works, I said. You only see it when you earn it. She nodded again, quiet, almost relieved. Before she left, she said, I'm not here to ask for anything. I just wanted to say thank you. Those words landed differently. They weren't empty. They were simple and real. She hugged me before leaving. Not the quick, distracted kind she used to give, but one that held weight. When she pulled away, her eyes were glassy but steady. I don't expect things to be the same, she said, but I'd like to make things right. I told her that making things right isn't about money or gifts. It's about remembering. Remembering who stood behind you when you couldn't stand yourself. After she left, I sat there for a while, watching the lights fade across the yard. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel bitter. I just felt at peace. She had finally come to me, not as someone entitled to what I had, but as someone who understood what it took to get it. That was worth more than any apology. Sometimes the greatest payback isn't seeing someone fall, it's watching them grow. She once called me a financial burden. That was the day she stopped being my daughter in the way I'd always known her. Not because I stopped loving her, but because I finally understood the kind of love I was giving. One that asked for nothing and received even less. For years, I believed being a good mother meant always saying yes, always fixing, always carrying. I believed that if I gave enough, it would make her grateful. But gratitude doesn't grow in comfort. It grows in struggle. She had to lose the softness of an easy life before she could feel the weight of her words. When she said those words, she thought she was strong. But strength isn't found in control. It's found in humility. And that's what life gave her, one declined transaction at a time. I didn't do what I did to hurt her. I did it to stop hurting myself. There's a difference. People think walking away is cruel, but it's not. It's necessary when the people you love start confusing your generosity with obligation. I had spent too many years being the one who gave, even when I had little left. I thought it was my duty to provide, even long after she was grown. I see now that part of parenting is knowing when to step back, when to let your children learn how to stand on their own, even if they stumble first. I didn't change the bank account to punish her. I changed it to remind her who built the balance she'd been living on. When the card declined, I imagined she felt what I had felt for years, helpless, embarrassed, and unseen. But unlike me, she had a chance to fix it herself. I didn't. I'd lived my whole life giving up pieces of myself so she could shine. The day I took my name back from that account, I wasn't reclaiming money. I was reclaiming respect. It wasn't revenge. It was balance being restored quietly, legally, without drama. Sometimes justice doesn't need a fight, just a form, a signature, and the courage to let people feel the outcome of their choices. Now, months later, she calls more often, not for help, not for money, but to talk. Real conversations about her work, about her life, about things that matter more than numbers on a screen. She tells me she's been saving, that she's paying her own bills, that she feels proud when she makes it through the month without debt. I listen and I smile, not because I need the credit, but because I can finally see her growing into someone I can respect again. I don't remind her of what happened. I don't bring up the past. Some lessons speak for themselves every time a card goes through, and she knows she earned it. I've learned something too. I learned that silence is more powerful than shouting, and small actions can say what words never could. I learned that dignity isn't given, it's protected. And I learned that sometimes love requires distance. If I hadn't stopped her, she would have kept taking. If I hadn't let her fall, she would have never learned how to stand. There's a kind of peace that comes with finally letting go of guilt, the peace that comes when you realize you were never supposed to carry someone forever. You raise them, you guide them, and when they forget, you remind them, not with anger, but with consequence. Now, when she visits, she brings groceries or flowers, or sometimes nothing at all. And that's fine too. What matters is that she shows up not because she needs me, but because she wants to. I can see it in the way she looks at me now. There's understanding in her eyes where pride used to be. The word burden has never come up again. I think she knows better than to use it. And every time I see her living honestly, I know that I did the right thing. She once called me a financial burden. Now she knows what a real burden is, living without gratitude, and she's learning how to lift it. I didn't ruin her life. I just handed her the truth, one quiet decision at a time. The day her card declined, mine finally cleared, not with money, with peace.